Sam Barry of Glamour. It's her first public event as Sam Barry of Glamour.
I know. So thanks for coming out for me, obviously, everybody. No, joking. So we're going to have a big chat today, and we're going to try to get at a lot of things, in particular around authenticity. And just to be very upfront about and authentic, I'm Irish, so I have a problem with THs. So the authentic as a word is something I struggle with, so I might drop the H at some stage. Okay, so you're back at South by Southwest. This is your second home. This has got a real special place in your heart for you.
I love it here so much. I mean, as I was telling you privately when you invited me out to a party, and I was like, I don't exit my home space after 7 p.m. This is the only place where I'm ever like excited to go out, want to reunite with a friend, like shocking youthful things. I want to do them all around Austin. I love it here, and Janet is 100% the reason that I have a career, and I don't forget it for a second. So if whatever she needed, including an organ, I would happily, any of my remaining organs, I would happily pass in her direction.
And does it feel very different coming back here? Like 2010 was almost a breakthrough moment for you at South by Southwest, where your Tiny Furniture won the Best Narrative Film. Does it feel different? Do you feel older and wiser 7, 8 years ago?
I literally remember when I came first in 2009 with a feature, then in 2010. This was my great plan for responsibly handling the festival. I had just gotten an iPhone, so I decided to make my iPhone favorites everybody who I thought might be able to get me into any party. So I was just like basically rolling calls for myself, and then sharing a room at let's give it a Spanish flair and say the La Quinta in and suites with like 7 other girls. And those were like some of the best days of my whole life. And I'm thrilled to be back in this kind of sort of more adult capacity, but I have a lot of nostalgia for all of that.
And you've only missed 1 year in the last 9 years.
I think I've only missed 1 year. Maybe 2 because of production, but like I've kept it pretty solid. It's a solid commitment in my calendar. And this is your first time, right?
First time, yeah. First time to Austin.
We've had a lot of taco talk, and she pronounces it in a very cute and Irish way.
We're going for tacos after this. Okay, so the panel, what we're talking about, the conversation is around authenticity.
Which
right?
we were scared. We were like, if we say it too many times, it is going to become extremely inauthentic. But yes, we're talking about authenticity and how do we sort of like define that concept in a packed media landscape, and what does it mean to try to bring it to your readers?
And I think when I think of authentic, I think real, and there's often a vulnerability that comes around with authenticity.
You're killing it. And by the way, if you say it in an Irish fashion, everyone will just assume you're smarter than them and they will carry on.
But I think that the vulnerability that comes along with authenticity often leads to criticism. How do you define being authentic? And how do you make sure that you do it in not only your personal writings, but also through the many projects that you have either are leading or have a hand in?
Well, thank you for that thoughtfully phrased question, which wasn't just like, you fuck up a lot. What's your secret to continuing to do that? Well, I hoped that my hairstyle would speak to the authenticity of this panel. But, I mean, for me, it's like, I have never known, I always say that this is the job that I have, which is this weird, sort of, filmmaker, writer, media hybrid. It's sort of the only thing that I was either going to be that or I was going to live in my parents' basement. Like there were only sort of 2 options for me. And I don't have the skills, and they don't have a basement, I just realized. So, but I don't have whatever the skill set is that allows you to sort of like program your own image from the outside and like make decisions about how you make sort of like calculated decisions about how you want to come across, which isn't always a bad thing. There are tons of women who I completely look up to who are curating their images in really fascinating ways and taking control of them. But like whenever I've tried to do that, it's been an epic fail. And I think when we're talking about authenticity, we're kind of talking about the difference between something aspirational and something that you can kind of that you can sort of see yourself in. And I certainly know I'm not the other thing. Like, I certainly knew when we started Lenny, when we started a media brand, that as much as I love a Goop or feel, envy about all of the like celebrity moms who are baking on Instagram, that wasn't a skill set I had. And what I was able to do was be clear about who I was, what I was capable of, what my process was. And so for me, it's funny because, these articles come out, they'll be like, Lena Dunham apologizes for the 87th time. And I'm like, that is sort of how I was raised, by a feminist mother who said, we try and we fail and we try again and we rethink the problem from another angle and we grow. And so
Does it ever make you want to stop putting yourself out there when you do get the barrage of criticism?
I'll have like 2 days where I'll be like, either full of shame. I'll have two modes. One is like, full of shame and like, I should never have been allowed out of my house in the first place, or like, nobody even deserves me. They don't deserve my truth, but it goes away really fast because it's sort of the only thing that I know how to do. And I've been thinking about it as we've been leading up to this panel, which is that for you, coming in now and rethinking a heritage women's media brand that has often been centered on sort of more aspirational ideas for women in their lives, like, what does authenticity mean to you in this new space that you're entering as editor-in-chief of a magazine that has like a sort of very rich history of showing women sort of what they, and this isn't always a bad thing, what they could be rather than what they are?
I think for me, there's been a couple of things. Obviously, I have spent, more than 10 years in news. So in newsrooms, you take yourself out of the story. You're not part of the story. You always try to come at it from a different angle. But in the publishing world, it is really about voice and opinion and stories. And one of the things that I've been thinking, especially taking on this new role, and I'm about 6 weeks in the job, is what you and I have discussed a lot since we first met, which is how can Glamour be really accessible and authentic and hear from different voices? And one of the things I'm very aware of as an editor-in-chief is the gaps in my knowledge. So, for example, I am a white girl from Ireland coming and taking over an American media brand, and there are stories that I want to tell that don't come from my point of view. And how do we reach out to writers and editors and just have that diverse staff as well in the team? And one of the things that's been interesting for me at Lenny Letter is it is very much based around the personal essays and the stories of people. How did you come up with that as the concept for your publishing debut, in particular when you're talking about Lenny Letter and the newsletter?
Well, I think, Lenny Letter is about 2.5 years old now. We came up with the idea about 3 years ago. Our CEO, Ben Cooley, who's helped us grow it and start our partnership with Condé Nast, is in the audience. And basically, Jenny, who's not here with me today because she's trying to make our new, she's desperately trying to measure the tents that people will be sleeping in on the set of our new television show, which is a camping-based farce. So there's a lot of tent conversation happening.
When's that out?
It's going to be out in October, but right now it's all about those tents. How tall are they? Is it funny enough? Are they short enough that it's funny? Well, is there enough room for the camera to get in? It's a big tent talk right now. You know about TED Talks, but these are tent talks. It's a whole other thing. But we knew that we had been given this incredible gift in the form of girls of being able to have this massive platform from which to speak. And then I was really lucky because I was writing for places like Glamour and The New Yorker, and I'd had the opportunity to put a book into the world. And it was actually when I was on my book tour and started having so many conversations with a really diverse array of young female writers and seeing the way that they connected with each other in the audience and were hungry for information, not from each other. I felt like we almost had a duty to create a space that elevated other women's voices the way that ours had been elevated. And of course, at first, people sort of assume like, Lena Dunham starts lifestyle brand, which like I wouldn't, my lifestyle brand is that like I got out of bed 15 minutes before I had to be there because I was suffering from severe and mysterious nausea. So I could talk to people about that, but like I don't have like a scone recipe or a fashion secret or even really an ability to get through my day in a normal way. So what we wanted to do was create a space that was really for other women to talk about what felt authentic to them. And what's been really exciting is how that space over the time that we've been publishing now has really come to belong to our contributors. Like, it's no longer essential. Like, when I recently published a piece about my hysterectomy, it was really important to me that it go in Vogue because I didn't want it to be like Lena Dunham's personal feelings newsletter. It's a place that is really like ownership has been taken by the women whose voices make up the newsletter every single week. And we knew that we wanted to cover, I mean, obviously we're dealing with a different thing than you are at Glamour, which is like, we're able to be incredibly partisan. We're able to be incredibly clear about our opinions. Like, you kind of know what you're signing up for politically when you sign up for Lenny. Like, you're not going to be like, what? They wrote about Planned Parenthood. And so we get this amazing gift, which is we can have a diversity of voices and opinions, but also be really clear about what we stand for. And I think that because of how much our contributors have trusted us with their work, that voice keeps growing. But I guess the question I wanted to ask you was, like, you have such an interesting background, which is coming out of news and then coming out of social media in a newsroom. And that, just as I might not be the traditional face of a celebrity lifestyle brand, like, that's not the first person that you think of when you're like, let's figure out who's going to take Glamour into the next phase of its life. And so I'd love you to rewind and tell me a little about your journalistic interests, how you got into it, and when you were given this sort of kind of insane and super specific opportunity, how did you feel like you were going to take that news background with you where you were headed?
So I started my career actually as a radio journalist, which was writing and reading the news to like the 4 truckers that were listening at 2 a.m. in Dublin. And I always loved journalism. I just always loved storytelling. I went from radio to being a TV producer at the BBC, but all the time being very interested in social and digital. And I think there's been a lot of talks about digital natives. I think you're our age, you are a digital native. But I've always been the person even at CNN or in the newsroom, that if the story of the morning or the story of the day was to do with the pay gap or Me Too or gender equality, that was the times that I got most fired up in the newsroom. And I think when this opportunity came to work at Glamour, it was my first reaction was, fuck, I really want to do this. And it was because I thought I really want to be in a place where I get to talk to women and hear the stories of women. And it feels like this defining moment for women. It's also this defining moment for publishing. And I've got a little bit of a follow-on question for you, because publishing it's going through a lot of change at the moment. And I think you and I have had conversations about how do we keep getting the money to invest in journalism around women, or just journalism in general? So is that expecting consumers to pay for it? Is that getting advertisers to understand that there may be more, safer, better environments than, let's say, Google or Facebook for them to put their advertising next to? And is that also the case that media companies need to diversify where they get revenue? Because you went into a publishing world 2.5 years ago, which, on the surface mightn't have seemed like the smartest decision in the current landscape.
I mean, we knew it was a completely bananas thing to do, and that it wasn't going to be our, at least not right now. There's no Lenny jet. It's made by 4 very, very, very hardworking women, and our CEO's amazing. He happens to be a man, and we're dealing with it as best as we can. But the thing that we really wanted to focus on is it's really, really, really important that women get paid to tell their stories and to do their work. And that is something that is becoming increasingly rare on the internet. there's conversation, people say like, oh, women's magazines, do they, create a pink ghetto where women's writing is only being seen by other women, and what does that do for the like sort of like longevity of women's stories? But I think it's so amazing. Like, think about how many women you're paying every month to do the work that they're passionate about. And like, to me, more than anything, that's the thing that we can't lose. And we can't lose women being able to express themselves and their identities and actually make a living at it. And it's a really, really complicated thing when the internet becomes, the kind of like, I saw this on an aggregate site. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what the brand identity is. And so our biggest goal was just to create a place that had a clear identity and employed lots of women all the time.
Do you think, as the business model of publishing kind of evolves, should it be more that the audience pay for quality content and those authentic quality voices, or should the advertising model change? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, we're talking about it. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, because we're talking about this constantly, which is like, we understand that asking people to pay for an internet newsletter is a tall order, because they're like, I'm just going to go somewhere to the millions of places where I can read about this, particular vaginal issue for free and move on. But I also think there's something so like what was more exciting when you were a kid than getting a magazine in the mail? Like,
Right.
were you a kid who had subscriptions to
so many.
magazines?
Yeah, I just would go to the newsstand and buy so many of them.
Oh my God, I would do horrifying things like when you would get those like Publishers Clearinghouse things, and you didn't have to offer any financial information to get subscriptions, and my parents would be like, why do we have a subscription to this car magazine?
Right.
Like, I was just ordering every magazine I conceivably could, and then they were footing the bill later.
We had a thing where in Ireland, after the magazine was over, the month was over, that the newsagents would cut the cover off, and then it was null and void, so they would just leave them out the back, and anybody would come and take it was an older magazine, but they had, they basically, we're on to the next month, these are the leftover copies, and we'd all take them.
You'd go take your coverless copy of the magazine? That's the greatest thing in the world.
But I mean,
and that's why her first issue of Glamour is going to have no cover.
Yeah.
She's really excited about it.
Yeah, it's going to be different.
I mean, how are you thinking about this? Because a huge part of your job now has to be going out and talking to advertisers.
I think, I do think about it in three ways. I do think about what can you offer that consumers will actually pay for. And I think, to your point, it's not everyday run-of-the-mill content. It is something super specialized. I think advertisers need to really get behind media companies, and journalism's doing great work, and put money back into them. And I do think that media companies need to diversify their business models. If you have depended on, let's say, print advertising alone, you need to look for new sources of income that go along with your brand.
So there's been a lot of talk about the fact that you're like a digital native editor who's now being hired to run a print magazine. And you told me when we had our first scintillating lunch, where she took me out to an Irish pub. It was all very on brand.
We had beef and Guinness pie, and I made you drink at lunchtime. It was very on brand.
I loved everything about it. You told me I wanted to understand like what you were doing at CNN, and you told me the amazing story of what election night looked for you at CNN, and what the kind of pressure that you'd been faced with day to day. Is that a story you'd be comfortable repeating to this audience?
Well, I think I was super lucky to work at CNN. I came over in 2014, and I worked through one of the most engaging general elections America has ever had, and I think having a front row seat at CNN was fascinating. And for me, I think anybody that watched the town hall that CNN did recently on Parkland, the operations behind what a cable news organization like that, the amount of effort and the amount of people in the room to get those types of things done have been fascinating. The conversation we had was, there's a big group of people at CNN that plan for elections, and we plan in the weeks running up every possibility. So we had, we had planned for her winning, and we had planned for him winning, and we had planned for a constitutional crisis. And I think we're all in the DC bureau. And it was interesting to see how many people are involved, because when you have a big news organization like CNN, you have the person that talks into Wolf Blitzer's ear, the person that hits go on the alert in the app, my team that were doing all social, and everybody had to be on the same page at the same time to make sure we didn't mess it up. But it was interesting to do the lead up to that and plan for all eventualities. And I think I was surprised in the newsroom that night when I think it got to about 9:30, and I asked my team to give me back the Donald Trump winning language, and I wanted to have another look at it. And I probably, honestly, if I'm being frank, had spent more time myself personally going over whether the grammatically correct first female president or first woman president was the language we were going to go with if the result went that way.
Yeah, and so suddenly you've like probably caused mass pandemonium by asking for that.
We're very calm in a newsroom when in times of breaking news, but it's interesting to move from, again, a newsroom into publishing, where you become part of the story whether you want to or not. As an editor-in-chief, you're really looking for voices. I think in a newsroom you stay back and you're an unbiased observer of the news. You talked very, very briefly, and I really do want to touch on it, on your essay that you wrote for Vogue about your hysterectomy. And one line that stood out for me was where you described your uterus as the Chinatown knockoff purse, which was both subtle and obvious in its flaws, or some beautiful phrase that I'm obviously butchering. How was that process? Getting, what made you want to tell that story? And even just the process of sitting down to write it, because it was super personal, but throughout the whole writing, there's some amazing humor in this, in your telling of this momentous part of your life.
Well, thank you. And the response from women has been one of the most heartening things I've ever experienced. And I think that's the reason that I had to talk about it, which is that most of the things that I've done in my career, and one of the reasons that we wanted to start Lenny, is because I've always wanted to operate from a place of erasing shame. And I haven't always done it successfully, and I haven't always pulled it off perfectly, but like my goal has always been to show people. There's this term that's used, if anyone here has ever been to Al-Anon, I don't know if you have any alcoholics in your family, I'd recommend it. Yep, a little clap for Al-Anon, liked that a lot. It's a great place to go, even if you don't have any alcoholics in your family, you just can't say no. But it's free too, but not sponsored over here, not sponsored. But there's this term that I've heard in that room where people talk a lot about feeling terminally unique, like that the worst feeling that you can have is that you feel as though your issues are yours and yours alone. And the reason that I wanted to make my first feature was because I didn't feel like I had seen my story and the story of the interaction between the women in my family on screen before. And the reason I wanted to make girls was because, for many reasons, I didn't feel like I'd seen friends like mine, I didn't feel like I'd seen a body like mine, and I didn't feel like I'd seen sexuality depicted in the way that I felt like I'd been sold a bill of goods about sexuality. And then as I started to grow out of my 20s, I felt like I was experiencing this thing that was so massive and so lonely and so complicated physically and emotionally, and I had no idea that I wasn't the only person who had ever, the only people I'd heard of it had hysterectomies were like my 67-year-old grandmother. Like, I just didn't know that we were out there. And so when I actually really credit Anna Wintour. I told her what was going on, and she said, take your time, but we would love for you to write something. And when I got home from the hospital, that story sort of flowed out of me, and the editors at Vogue were incredibly respectful of the fact that this wasn't, a piece we were going to necessarily edit to death, because it was sort of, it had to exist in its most sort of like crystalline form. But what I was so happy about was really a selfish thing, which is that like I got to understand how many of us there were and how many women had been sort of like promised a version of their body that they didn't end up getting. And we've had a lot of women write about things like that on Lenny, whether it's, you know, miscarriage or being diagnosed with cancer at a young age or dealing with mental health issues and trying to keep them private. Like, so much of the narrative of Lenny is people releasing shame and in the process, hopefully making things feel less lonely for their readers. And whenever we have a piece that hits and resonates in that way, it's such a gift and such a blessing.
Did you have lots of people around the same age that had gone through hysterectomy reach out to you? Have you heard from those people?
I literally like had a woman on an airplane the other day be like, it wasn't a hysterectomy, it was fibroids, but it was still really hard. Like, we're like, the amount of people I am having conversations about gynecological health with in public places is off the charts, but I like it. Like, I want to have, I'd rather do that than like exchange fake pleasantries. Like, it was only 3 months ago. I'm still going through it, and anyone else who's going through it, I would love to talk to them about it. Today's not a great day for me, but any other day, if you see me, I'm totally open to whatever you bring in my direction.
Do you think we've got to the stage where, you know, to that point where we, you know, women and young women in particular can talk about miscarriages and hysterectomies? Do you think it will become into this new era where it's okay to be open about something that's not going right in your life, whether it be mental health or physical health, or you're just not fitting into these ideas of what the norm is?
Well, I think the thing I was always scared about when I first started being open about mental health challenges, when I first started being open about some of the issues with my body, and there was never really a world where I, being who I was, wasn't going to tell those stories, but I really understood that, like, you know, we go into rooms every single day where we're already having to prove ourselves just because of our, you know, just because of something as sort of like both profound and arbitrary as gender. And so then you don't want to be perceived as the person who's also, like, you know, dragging around a suitcase of crap with them. And the idea that, I mean, the thing that I've always tried to stress when I've written about issues of mental health or issues of physical health is that, like, it doesn't make you weaker to have those things. It's actually this, like, you have all those issues and you're still choosing to get up every day and move through life. Like, that's such a big part of being a woman, is like when I had a few guys read that article and be like, I had no idea, like, that could even go down. Like, they were just so wigged out. Like, they were like, and then my real pleasures, I love being like, and you know what's the coolest part? They pulled my uterus out through my belly button. Didn't put that in the article, did I? And the guys were just like, ugh. But, like, you want to say, like, no, these things that have always historically been considered weaknesses, and these things that have been considered failings, and these things that we've had to keep private. And, you know, last night I went to see Andrew Bujalski's new movie, which is amazing, Support the Girls, it's called. I recommend it to everyone. And it opens with an image of Regina Hall crying in her car and then, like, clearing up her face before she goes into work. And it felt like such, like, a perfect metaphor for what women have been forced to do for such a long time. And one of the things I think that's so important about what you're doing is that, like, you're saying to women, like, no, you don't have to clean up your face.
I'm a huge crier in work. I have a corner that I cry in. No, I'm a massive
corner?
crier. And I remember once starting with an old boss, and I think there somebody else was crying in the office, and he made some remark which was, nobody cries in baseball. And I said, I've just started, you don't know me, but I will cry. Yeah. And I cry when I'm frustrated in work, and I think this idea that women can't cry in work is a bit antiquated, right? I think we show emotions in different ways often. So I'm definitely a work crier. Are you a work crier?
I'm the biggest work crier you've ever met in your life. And it's so pathetic how often it's that I haven't eaten.
Oh yeah, hungry. Big issue.
Yeah, I'm like, this is, you don't understand how wrong it all is. And then someone's just like, peanut butter and jelly, and then it's all resolved.
Yeah, I have friends
Everything.
that I used to travel with they would carry snacks because they know Hangry Sam is not a person you want to be around.
You don't
at
want to
all.
be
No.
around Hangry Sam.
So we were talking in the green room before this about, and I think this is an interesting question, and I have a couple of ideas of who I think it is, but who do you think out there in terms of brands or celebrities or people, who is the definition of authentic for you that we could see?
Well, it's interesting because there's the really obvious ones. Like there are a lot of incredibly smart and authentic women in comedy, whether it's, Amy Schumer or Tiffany Haddish or Tig Notaro or, there's Sarah Silverman. Like there's a sense that there are women who have just like made the decision to live their life out loud. And it's like, but I like sort of think that authenticity comes in many forms, and it doesn't just have to be that you like didn't do your hair right. Like I feel like people confuse authentic with the idea of like messy or broken or something. Like I think Anna Wintour's authentic. Like she's had that haircut for a fucking long time. And she looks rad and she knows who she is. And
Unapologetic about it.
unapologetic about being so clear about her identity and so clear about what interests her and so clear about sort of like what her personal brand is. And to me, it's just as exciting to see and meet that or see, Joan Didion in a Celine ad as it is to see somebody who's like willing to admit that they're wearing Spanx on a red carpet.
Right.
Like I think authenticity can encompass all of that, which is why it's like I wanted to ask you, does it feel antithetical to be like obviously a part of your business is and is going to have to be, figuring out who people want to see on the covers of magazines right now and how they want to see them. And how much is the idea of like authenticity or people who are clear versus glamour, like how much is that kind of like debate informing the way you think about who you're going to cover and how you're going to cover them?
I think one of the things that I've spent a lot of time, especially in the last 6 weeks, is defining what I want Glamour to look like under me as editor-in-chief. And the 3 words I kept coming back to were accessible, authentic, and relevant. I really want us to, to what you were speaking about earlier, I want people to see when they look at us on digital or in a magazine that they see them in the people that we feature in either fashion or beauty or just profiles. And I think one thing that I'm very invested in is understanding that Glamour's not Vogue, right? Vogue for me is super aspirational.
Yeah.
You go to the designers to inquire about a price. I don't think that's Glamour's place in the market. And I do think there is a huge group of women in the middle of the country in particular that don't feel like they're being either heard or listened to or having their stories heard. And I think that is definitely one of the things I want to do at Glamour. And just relevancy. I think there's these huge conversations around women at the moment, whether that be Me Too or women in the workplace or the financial power of women, that, Glamour as a brand that's been around for 78 years, which is amazing, can really own.
That's so exciting. That's so exciting. And like, are there people for you who, that question you asked me about, who represent authenticity in a clear and specific way to you?
I think, some of them are comedians. I think there's often, when I think about authentic, I do think self-deprecating. So there's an amazing Irish comedian, Sharon Horgan, who wrote and starred in Catastrophe, and she wrote Divorce, and she just tackles like motherhood and breakups in a really, really, really authentic way. And then I just have people in my life. I have these WhatsApp groups of amazing women, including my sister, who's a stay-at-home mom she lives in Sweden with her very beautiful Swedish husband, and she has these 3 kids that are under the age of 4, and what she puts on Instagram is honestly like something out of a catalogue, but what she says to me in a WhatsApp group and on FaceTime is really authentic, and it is not what she puts on Instagram. So I think it's like the women in your life that keep you grounded in just the reality of what's happening. Do you think authenticity and confidence are intertwined?
No, I think one of the greatest like gifts that we can, I think if we're thinking ever about like celebrity as a social service, and obviously it's really important to like, which it's not. But if you were thinking about, like, one of the great things we can do is become involved with causes that we care about. One of the great things we can do is take the fact that we're, paid an inappropriate amount for the work we do and give back. One of the things that we can do is draw attention to other people's stories. But another thing that we can do that I think is really, really valuable is be honest about the fact that when we don't feel good or safe in our bodies or being ourselves. Like, I think there's Jenny, Connor and I were just talking, like, we were doing casting for our show this week, and literally everyone who came in, we'd like see an actress we know, and we'd be like, "How are you doing?" She'd be like, "I don't know, I feel weird." And we were like, something was like sort of in the air this week. There's a lot going on for women. There's a lot going on for women that's exhausting and triggering, and one of the greatest gifts we can give each other is to like normalize that for each other. And that like I remember that was one of the reasons why I was so like in love with, with when I was younger with like, was a too soon precocious reader of Sassy, but was like obsessed with the fact that like they were telling you that everything that you felt that felt so abnormal was normal, and that you were like, it was almost like, I joke all the time that I just want to have a website called isthisnormal.com where you can just type in like symptoms, an emotional state, and just find out if it's normal really fast so you can go on with your day. And I really like when people can be, I feel like authentic people and authentic brands make it clear to me that, isthisnormal.com isn't even necessary because there is no normal.
Right, I like that. And we both, run or are editors of women's brands, and you talked earlier about the pink ghetto. Do you think that there needs to be more efforts on both of our parts or other women's titles to bring men into the conversation?
Well, it's a great question. Did someone go, "Oh," or did they go, "No"? That's the question. But I like that it elicited something from the audience, even just one man. I said no. Oh, no. Okay, you don't want to be of help. I understand. I understand.
No, just to clarify, I would like to help, just not be asked.
Yeah, got it. 100%. Got it.
I feel like we're in stand-up now.
I know, it's really good. I like wish I had a fun audience bit to do with you. Anyone here from Orlando? But I think that it's a really complicated thing because, I always do feel hesitant and vaguely annoyed when there's a conversation about feminism and a man raises his hand and goes like, "But wait a second, I feel like I haven't been heard here." Like, that's like the most, like, I remember being on a panel about women in film really early in my career with a bunch of other independent filmmakers. We were all sitting in a row, and someone raised their hand and we're like, "Why do you think more women, there are so many women who are editors and there are women who are producers, but that the numbers for women in directing are so low?" And this was before that we were doing, major studies of the breakdown in Hollywood. And before I could say anything, this guy on the panel who was a douchebag was like, "Well, I think," and literally I just stopped and I was like, "That's why, because you just asked, I'm the only woman on the panel, and that guy thought he had the answer." That being said, and then literally I got up to go to the bathroom and he came to follow me and I screamed, "Don't follow me." And he said, "I just have to pee too," and we've never spoken since. But
It's a beautiful, part of a beautiful friendship.
it's a beautiful story. I hope he is enjoying his day wherever he is. But at the same time, like, there's so many causes, things like wage equality, things like, things like protecting workplaces so that people feel physically and emotionally safe. Like, those are joint efforts. That can't be a mandate that comes down from women that men nervously follow. And so the fact that there has to be some sense of mutual understanding and collaboration to create these environments where we're going to feel safe, while at the same time women really, really, really need to know that there are spaces that just belong to them. Like, that's the thing that it's our job to balance, and it's a complicated job.
Do you know if there's many men reading Lenny Letter?
Well, our CEO's in the audience, and I think he's going to go with a big fat no on that. But every time we hear about it, we're pretty excited. 5% men? That seems like both higher than I thought and lower than I could have imagined. But so if the newsletter's 5% men and most of them subscribe so that they could look cool on dates, then it is interesting to me. Like one of my favorite things with girls was when someone would come up to me and say, the show made me feel like I understood my daughter better, or it changed my relationship with my wife. Or like a guy would come and he'd go, I know I'm not your target audience, but I'm a 78-year-old man from Cleveland and I feel like I've learned a lot. Like that's the dream, and it doesn't happen all the time. But like it would make me so happy if there were men who felt like they were getting something valuable out of the stories and illustrations and photo essays that we're publishing twice a week. And like, why shouldn't a man want to read, a super cool, extensive interview with, Melinda Gates or Tori Spelling, just to name just to name a couple of my faves. And, but it's complicated because we're also, you're thinking about this as you redesign your magazine, which is like you're also trying to package something that like makes women feel like there's a space for them,
Right.
even if it's a sort of abstract space.
We have male writers, and I think one of the things that we've been exploring now, especially around the pay gap that we're chasing for a story, is the Salary Whisperer Network, and that. And how that could potentially impact the pay gap. And I remember when I was coming up for contract at CNN, getting all the guys drunk and asking them what they were paid, and it helped me go into my negotiations with one of them sitting in the audience right now, and it helped me go into my negotiations with a much better understanding of what I should ask for. I don't think if I had got all the girls drunk and asked them, I would have been in such a powerful negotiation place. And I think there is definitely, when you talk about, as you said, the workplace or gender equality, there is a time when you bring men into the conversation so they feel part of the change. And there's a lot of conversations, interestingly enough, the last couple of weeks and the last couple of months, how to raise a feminist boy. Do you have any advice?
How to raise a feminist boy. Well, it's interesting. I have a lot of amazing feminist friends a lot of my friends are starting to have kids now. It's that moment. And so, your friends have kids, you have a hysterectomy. It's just like everyone's just doing their thing. And a lot of women I know will find out that they're pregnant with a son and seem to have genuine alarm not because they think their son's gonna go out and become a predator, but because there's such a sense of anxiety around how have we mismanaged our boys and what's the way that we're going to do better. And it's just like sort of women think like, I knew what I was going to say to my daughter and I don't know what I'm going to say to my son. But I think exposing your child from a really early age, there was nothing more heartening than being at the Women's March and seeing all of the little boys sitting on their, mom or dad's shoulders who were getting to experience the intensity and totality of that moment. And also just it's really simple stuff. I think we spent a long time, and I come from, I'm a cis woman. I have a gender nonconforming sibling who, and we were raised by, clearly and distinctly feminist parents. But I think there was a lot that we just assumed was understood by young men that actually needed to be said out loud. And I think saying things out loud is never the wrong thing.
No. I have a brother who, I don't think he realized he was a feminist until he had a daughter. And he says it himself, his daughter's 6 now. And he, I think when he had his daughter, he realized how people talk to even little girls and around the concept of beauty, and that was where they were getting their validation. And he went from being my little brother to being the biggest feminist I know, where he would be, don't tell my daughter she's beautiful, tell her she's kind, and tell her she's smart. And it's so funny with especially with children, how they change people's perspective on feminism in particular.
I know people were always so angry when male celebrities would go like, as a father of daughters, I'm outraged, because obviously like it should be just like, as a fellow citizen of women, I'm outraged. As a person who's met another person, I'm outraged. But you do also have to have empathy for the fact that like our life experience, our lived experience is what allows us to understand and then create change. And for a lot of men, until they until they became father of daughters, they truly weren't put in the position to have to understand or protect the emotional and physical reality of a woman.
Right.
They just weren't. They'd been protected by a woman, their mother, but they had never had the inverse experience. So I have a lot of empathy for that.
Right, I agree. So we talked a little bit earlier, and I'm going to go back to it. When you're being authentic, how do you safeguard yourself from, what kind of self-care safeguards do you put out there so you don't feel butchered to shreds? Or, does it hurt more when somebody attacks the authentic you?
I think, well, the way I safeguard it is I have about 19 people who are at any point stopping me, ready to stop me from tweeting.
Yeah.
Many of them paid. But I think what is really hard is like, it was always easy for me when I was campaigning for Hillary Clinton and, the Christian right was outraged and, somebody shook their fist in my face while I was, visiting, West Virginia or whatever like that. It's easy when you're dealing with someone who you understand. I had a clear understanding, like, okay, these are people who basically don't believe in my fundamental rights, and there is a disconnect that will prevent us from making our way towards each other. And they basically don't think I'm human, and so in a way, they cease being human to me, which is its own problem, because that is what creates this gap where we don't understand why people voted for Trump, and we don't understand a huge portion of what this country is thinking and feeling disenfranchised. But it's a really hard thing, which is when you become like nothing, less than garbage to someone else, it's very, very, very hard to see them as a fully formed person. It takes someone who's really enlightened to do that. So I always had an easy time with that. I think what's been painful, and which I've had to take responsibility for, have been the moments when I've struck out with the audience that I care about the most, which is like women who share my fundamental beliefs and who are trying to work towards the same goals. And the thing I've always tried to say over and over, and I don't expect people to understand this, is like, I didn't get into this to be like a perfect celebrity role model. I don't know how to do it. I don't know, I don't have, that's not where my skill set lies. And I think a big part of my 30s is moving away from this sense that I need to have an opinion about everything, or is taking a moment to think before I speak, like giving myself moments of calm in which to reflect and understand how I can be useful. Because there was something about the sort of, if I'm being authentic with this audience, I got suddenly fairly well known. I was 23 years old. All these people are asking me for my opinions about everything. I was the kid in school who was like, nobody wanted to know what I had to say about anything, and I was basically having to, I started my own school newspaper that had a very low distribution, just because I wanted someone to fucking listen to me. So suddenly everyone's going like, what do you think about this, and what's your feeling on this politician and this? And I'm just like so excited and grateful to be heard and to be seen and to not be the girl who gets an anonymous message from the boy in high school that says you're fat and you deserve to die. Like suddenly I'm a person, and there's so much temptation to just go like, I'm a person and I'm here and I'm ready to talk. And now I find myself wanting to slow down and think about how I can give other women the platform that was given to me, and how I can speak through my work. And I hope that this is maturing. I think it is.
Sounds like it.
I can't be sure. I still wear my hair like this. But you know, something I was wanting to ask you is like, you know, both you and I aren't the like I'm not necessarily the celebrity that you expect to start like a, you know, lifestyle branding newsletter, which people thankfully figured out pretty fast wasn't what we were trying to do, although I have a lot of respect for the people who do it. But you're not the typical editor-in-chief of a women's magazine. Like,
What
you're
do you think the
doing
typical one is?
well, like I think about like, you know, like if people's like Tilda Swinton in Trainwreck, basically. You know, like I just think about like someone who's like, you know, like at a standing desk in Prada heels, rolling calls and, you know, asking for small pieces of steak. I don't know. Like it's what I've seen in the movies, but also your background. Your background's not typical because what you care about is news and you care about breaking news stories. And like you said to me when we sat down, you were like, the fashion is a part of it and the celebrity is a part of it, but in a way, it's a way to like sort of Trojan horse in your message.
I think you're right. I think one of the things is, especially with Glamour, and I do think it's done in recent history. It's the perfect place to play for journalism around women, and I think it has a massive right to play in that space. And I think for me, it's having the fashion and the beauty team and having them all. They know it better than I do. You know, again, back to understanding where your gaps in knowledge are. But I know how to tell stories, and I know how to work with writers, and I know how to some of the topics that I care about. And that's, you know, I think the typical editor-in-chief is almost fallen to the wayside. I think if you see that with, you know, there's been a lot of unexpected editor-in-chiefs that have been hired in even recent months. And I think one of the things that publishing in particular is looking at is magazines aren't, it's not just a magazine, it's a brand. So for me, Glamour and the opportunity to come to work at Glamour was of course about the print publication, which I'm really excited about putting out, and we have something new and very different in May, and it will have a cover. But it's also the digital part of it, and it is also Glamour Women of the Year, which has been around for a while. How do we, for me, one of the things I want to do is how do we blow out this amazing event about women's empowerment into something throughout the year that the audience feels that they have a part of? How do we engage people all over America on the lead up to Glamour Women of the Year, make them feel a big part of it? So I think, and I also think publishing itself is taking risks with some of the hires that they're making. I think it's a risk that's going to pay off.
I mean, don't get me wrong. You're very chic. I wasn't trying to say, like, look at her just scrapping her way in here. Like, you definitely have the whole thing going on. It's just a cool, different energy.
It's different. It's different.
She's got a sneaker on, guys. She's a People's editor-in-chief.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to girls for a moment.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to talk about that because you talked about this moment, and I think it is true that there was a moment when girls came out that that felt like some women were like, I've never seen me in this on screen. Were you surprised at how surprised people were by the content on HBO?
Yeah, I think that I didn't quite understand because I had been making independent films and then making the show in a vacuum. I didn't understand what a response people would have to the way that we depicted sex and bodies, how angry it would make certain people, how relieved it would make certain people.
Who'd you make angry?
The thing that really fascinated me was like men, like I got a lot of, that was when I was still looking at my Twitter, but I got a lot of tweets that were like, I don't want to fuck her, but it's fine if she's naked. Like they were kind of like, she can do her thing. It's not for me, but I found there was so much vitriol from other women and women who had body types similar to mine because it was sort of like, there was this energy of like, how dare you? I've spent my entire life working so hard to wear like the right tent top that doesn't let you know that I even have a waist. How dare you think that it's appropriate for you to take your clothing off on television and expose all of our secrets and tell people what our butts look like? Like, it's just, I really felt that vitriol and anger coming from women. The tweet that I got the most often would be like these tweets that were like, I think I've seen Lena Dunham's boobs more often than I've seen my own. I couldn't have gotten that tweet more times. And I wanted to be like, okay, unless you're a never nude like Tobias Funke on Arrested Development, I don't know what you're talking about. And also like why does my sense of freedom in my body have to give you, so why does it have to make you feel like I'm trying to take something from you? And that was something that I wrestled with the whole time. And I think like I got a lot of like, it would be fourth season and people would be like, are we done with the nudity yet? Can we let this go? And I was like, no, I didn't come to like do it twice and make a point. Like, this is what the world looks like, and we're trying to show you what the world looks like. And on some fronts we really succeeded, and on others we didn't. Like, there were huge conversations about diversity around the show that were some of the most educational and important conversations of my life. Like, those are the moments that criticism teaches you about yourself and your blind spots and the ways the ways that you've been problematized by the culture that you've been raised in. And so like there was a lot of criticism that I felt grateful for, but I remember one of the most painful things was seeing how angry the content made certain women who I thought were sort of like of my tribe, if that makes sense.
What did you learn from girls that you're taking into your new project?
It's a great question. I mean, I think Jenny Connor, who's not here with me today, but is my what did you say?
She's looking at
She's
tents.
looking at tents. She's deep in tent world, but we're working on this new show called Camping, which is about basically a group of people who go camping for the weekend and have quite the time. There's some true life destroying moments, but I think like what we figured out is that people want to see sort of like honest depictions of their own struggle. And so we're dealing with like a different age group. This is these characters in their 30s and they have children. Like it's another universe, but continuing to be honest about sex and physicality and monogamy and continuing to try to tell stories where we're going like, I haven't seen that on TV before. Like that's really meaningful to us. And something that I've been so excited about that you've been doing, like, because I've been following the site since the minute that you took over, is like, there've been, you are not letting Glamour's site be sort of like, an aggregate of lip kit stories. You're really making sure that people are reading about things like the huge thing you did around Larry Nassar and the abusive gymnasts. Like, you're making sure that people are reading about things in a way that they haven't before, in a place that they didn't expect to get it.
Yeah, I think some of the coverage we did around Larry Nassar was unexpected for the Glamour audience, and we went into it with a super Glamour lens. We have amazing relationships with some of the gymnasts, including Ali, and it was just as Larry Nassar was unfolding, it was of course a Glamour story. And one of the follow-ons that we did was we had these personal essays from the moms of gymnasts. So how do you protect your kid when you want to put them forward for a sport like this, when you see this unfold before you? And we kept that conversation open. We've done some, interesting stuff around guns and women. So we went to the Vegas show, this was before Parkland, and we just talked to women in what I would like to describe as a non-judgy way. We just went and spoke to women and we asked them why they owned a gun, and they were very open and honest with us. And then one of the stories that I'm super proud of that we did recently was Cape Town is one of the biggest cities in the world that's about to hit a drought. I think in June or July 9th, they're going to have no water. And it's a big environmental news story, but we went at it from a Glamour point of view, and we went and we talked to women about self-care in Cape Town. And these women are cutting their hair and they're not washing for weeks. And really, we went after, which is a Glamour topic, self-care is a Glamour topic.
Yeah.
But how do we go after something that's happening in the world from a Glamour point of view? So that's been kind of fun.
I love,
and
that
I think
is literally so fascinating. The idea of drought prep involving like getting a pixie cut is something that would never have occurred to me.
And
That's
you talked
incredible.
about the aggregate of like clickbait content, and I was explaining to my team about, and I used it in I used two Kardashian stories to explain the kind of Kardashian stories I liked on the site and the kind of ones that I didn't. And one was Kim Kardashian has pink hair. That's not necessarily adding anything to the conversation.
Plus,
We're not
it's
doing
a
origi-
wig, guys.
Yeah.
She is a really good wig person.
But the ability of Kylie Jenner to lose Snapchat 1.7 billion in stock market value with a tweet, that's a Kardashian story I'm interested in. This is a woman
Yeah.
that can move markets with 140 characters.
Yeah.
And I think that was an interesting story for me. We are out of time, but I'm going to round up. I started asking you about South by Southwest. So I'm going to ask you, what's the plan? Besides getting all the medical problems with people in the audience,
I've calmed down, so I'm ready to hear you now.
what's on the agenda for the rest of South by Southwest?
Well, you and I want to eat tacos, as you would pronounce it. That's a goal that we have. And then I'm really excited because I'm going tonight, which is to see the premiere of a film that I was lucky enough to be in called Half the Picture. That's about women and the lack thereof directing films in Hollywood, and it's been a really beautifully, carefully curated film about the gender gap in filmmaking. And so I'm going to get to go see it and see the filmmakers and hopefully see some of the other women who were involved. And so I'm really excited and lucky to be able to get to be there for that.
Thank you. And
Thank
all
you
for
so
coming.
much.
Thank
I find you so charming. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.